Hello and welcome to The Print. Now, today's been a very, very busy day, and of course, it's budget day, but I have for you a very illustrious panel that's going to be talking to you about the budget highlights. They, of course, are also very busy today, so I'm going to keep my questions short, and we're going to keep this session short and pointed. Now, we have with us Miss Aditi Nayar, who is the Chief Economist and Head of Research and Outreach at ICRA. We have Mr. Amit Basole, who's Professor of Economics and Head of the Center for Sustainable Employment at Azim Premji University, and Mr. Samir Kanabar, who's a tax partner at EY India. So basically, between the three of them, we're going to get a full snapshot of the various big issues in this budget. So now, first of all, thank you all for joining us. I know it's a busy day, so thank you for sparing time. Now, Ms. Nair, I'd like to start with you. The question before the budget came was whether the government was going to focus more on fiscal consolidation or whether it was going to focus more on demand generation and employment generation. Do you think that it has struck a balance, or do you feel that it's leaning more one towards the other?
Thank you. Well, I would say that the fiscal math has come in very, very close to what we were expecting. We
Mhm.
had a revenue upside that we had pegged at 1.2 trillion, and the budget has actually pegged that revenue upside slightly higher at 1.3 trillion. And this is despite the tax foregone, which is also quite small. So, firstly, no major tax relief, which is in line with what we were expecting. I was a little surprised by the customs duty reduction on gold and silver, but other than that, I would say revenue side broadly along expected lines. On the expenditure side, as we had said, it's not fruitful at this juncture to add to the capex target. We already have a very large target and not a whole lot of time left in this fiscal year to actually be able to spend it. And the increase in the revenue expenditure is broadly again quite similar to what we had thought. We thought it'd be 50 to 60,000 crore, and that's exactly what has come in. And within the targeting, a lot of welfare related measures, rural economy supportive measures, broadly in line with what we in the market were expecting. So that brings us to a fiscal deficit of 4.9% of GDP,
Mhm.
which is at the lower end of our range of 4.9 to 5%. So overall, I would say that the fiscal math quite in line with what we had thought. And I would say that it's a good budget in terms of balancing the expenditure side and the fiscal consolidation.
Okay, great. So now coming to the employment side, Mr. Basole, I wanted to ask you, there are several announcements on the employment side. There are three employment linked incentive schemes, and there are incentives for internships. Do you feel that, well, the focus on all of these is on formal sector job creation? So do you feel that this was the way to go?
Thanks. We can. I should say that there is a signaling aspect to the budget, which is what was discussed in the speech and foregrounded, and
Mhm.
then there's the actual numbers. Whether this is going to come through with enough funding and so on. We don't. Many of these schemes are new, so we don't actually know how much will be needed. So setting that aside, though, to answer your question, this is, of course, a good thing. Formalization itself, nobody can object to, and the PF-based sort of wage subsidy approach has been in the works for a while. States have tried it, centers also tried it. We don't know actually if it works or not. There aren't enough good studies on what happens when you give employers these wage subsidies. Do they actually hire new workers? Do they convert existing third-party contract workers to their own roles? What happens after the sunset clause, which is usually 3 years or so, happens? Do the workers remain? None of this is well understood, I should say. Having said all that, I think the important part that we have been pointing to in the labor market is not the formal part. That is the informal sector distress that we've been
Right.
talking about. Yesterday's economic survey says there is no such thing. So I think the budget connects to the survey in that sense, that the economic survey says actually distress is not a thing, and the
Right.
budget doesn't seem to have anything particularly going on there, with the possible exception of MSME based sort of approach, basically deregulation, some credit stuff, and some infrastructure stuff about MSME job creation. Now, there the real test will be, does it actually go down to the small and micro end where a lot of the distress and the surplus labor is actually located? And we don't know the answer to that.
Okay. So basically, that's actually why I had asked you the question, why I pointed out the formal job creation part, because I figured it's the informal sector where the distress really is. But Mr. Kanabar, I wanted to ask you about the main thing that households are concerned with, which is income tax. So, could you tell us that these, from what I could see, is they've only changed the slabs. They haven't changed the rates. The standard deduction has increased a little bit, but do you feel that this is a significant change? It's something that's actually going to impact households' budgets?
So let me give a different perspective or a lens to look at it. The intention of government is to eventually phase out the old exemption based regime, which they have actually done for corporates, where they have phased out or removed all the deductions, exemptions, all tax holidays. So intention is to also follow this for personal tax.
Right.
If that was the stated objective or that is the purpose to be achieved, then what they have done, to answer your question, is not enough, because the people who will be under the lower income bracket, say below even 10 lakhs for that matter, may
Mhm.
not be able to take advantage of the new tax regime and would continue to follow the old regime because they claim HRA, they claim interest on housing loans, etc., etc. So
PPF, all of that.
everything, yeah, ATC, etc. So you would continue to be under the old regime so long as you are below 10 lakhs, or even for that matter even 12 lakhs, right? And we just did a back of the envelope working. So the benefit, while it is projected as 17,500 rupees, but it is not so. It is between 2,500 to 17,500, so in a graded manner. That's how
I
the
see.
benefit is getting translated to individuals. Somebody in 3 to 5 lakhs bracket, of course below 3 lakhs there is no tax under new regime. So but between 3 to 5 lakhs, the benefit is just 2,500. So that is how it stacks up. So the idea should have been to encourage, and of course I must mention that in the speech it was mentioned that under the new regime 58% of the tax is getting collected and two-thirds of the tax filers are under the new regime, right?
Right.
Having said that, if the objective was to still convert one-third of the taxpayers into new regime, then obviously something more should have been rolled out, which we don't see. So that's one part. And of course, whatever money will, by standard deduction and contribution to national pencil scheme and all of that, is not going to translate into huge benefit, right? And
Right.
at the same time, the investors, which will come separately, but a lot of capital gains tax is being levied, which we'll talk separately as capital market transaction, is
Yes.
going to impact other way.
Okay. And now, Ms. Nair, you had mentioned about capital expenditure and how it hasn't increased from the interim budget amount. So now the economic survey also talked about how the government, it's the responsibility of the government to invest in things that create linkages or improve transport, but it's for the private sector to take this forward. So do you feel that not increasing the capex amount is a signal to the private sector that now please get going on investing?
I'm not sure that we should necessarily interpret it as a signal, because when we look at the YOY increase, it's pretty large. So as compared to the actual outlay in FY24, we've got a mid-teens growth in any case. So that's a lot of growth from FY24 to FY25. And if we look at the quality of total expenditure, that itself is going up from some 19% 2 years back to around 24% now. So the government is still putting a lot of weight behind capital expenditure. But the fact of the matter is that capex doesn't kick off during the election cycle. And we've seen that in the month of April and May, Capex actually contracted by 14% instead of the 17% growth which had been put into the interim budget estimate over last year's figure. So we've got a lot of headroom left to spend between, let's say, August and March. By the time the budget is presented, we'll still be in the middle of the monsoon season. And normally, we don't see a lot of momentum of Government of India's capex during the monsoon months. So even August is not going to be a 1 lakh crore kind of a capex month. Really, only from September, October, we'll start seeing higher numbers. Then again, we get into the Diwali season. And again,
Right.
typically, we see a lull. So I think it's much more of an acknowledgement that this is a year where it's going to be difficult to actually get the money out and the projects executed. Getting the money out is a separate thing, and getting the projects executed is a separate thing in some cases. Similarly, in fact, I'm a little surprised to see that the allocation for the state's capex loan scheme has also been increased to 1.5 trillion from 1.3 trillion.
Yes.
My understanding is that the guidelines for the untied portion of that possibly had been shared, and the money under the untied portion of that had started flowing to the states. But at least my understanding is that for the tied portion, the guidelines would have come only after the budget. So if we increase the tied portion versus the untied portion, when the money actually starts flowing, it's difficult for the states to now ask for, identify a project, ask for money, get it, spend it before March. So it's going
Right.
to be a little challenging. There may be some spillovers from this year to next year.
Okay, and now, Mr. Basole, the whole point of the, or rather, not the whole point, but a large part of the government's capex push over the years has been to generate some sort of employment. Now, this budget has quite a focus on employment, and you've talked about the employment-linked incentives, but they've also made quite a push for internships. And now, the way I see it, it seems that an internship would be a good way to bridge the skill gap, because a lot of companies say that the people that we get actually don't know enough. We need to spend a lot of time training them. So, do you feel that this will go some way in doing that?
Yeah, that is clearly where it is coming from, and it's a good thing that something along these lines has at least been started, because we know that when we say unemployment in India, really what we are talking about is the school to work transition. Almost all the unemployment is among people who have college degrees or diplomas and who are less than 30 years of age. So it's really that first entry, etc. That those frictions are where the unemployment comes from. Now, whether it is because aspirations don't match the labor market reality, or because employers find new people unemployable, there are many reasons that could be there. This is trying to solve that link in one way. It reminds me a little bit of those apprenticeship discussions in the election cycle that were going on as
Yes.
well. This seems to be a corporate focused thing, which I assume is A, because it's easier to do something like this, and B, maybe it's aspirational. Although my gut feeling would be that doing something like this with local businesses is actually where you would get most results, in a sense that that's where a lot of the young people who are struggling to find options and so on, and local businesses who are not finding workers, that mismatch issue might be a much more local issue, is my feeling. But anyway, they've started where they've started, and I think it's a good thing. Let's wait and see what happens on that. Just very quickly on the capital expenditure bit, the puzzle, of course, so long has been, why has capital expenditure still been weak and so forth. Now, I
Right.
see in the economic survey that they're trying to make an argument that it is actually picking up now, which, if it's the case, that is great. Otherwise, we've had this sort of, trichotomy in a way. There's these top end, high profit corporate sector, which is not investing profits that exist. And then there's the not listed corporate sector, which actually not doing very well. So its
Right.
lack of investment is not very mysterious, because actually they don't have the surplus to invest. And then there is the MSME sector, which is also not doing well. So the mystery of not having enough investment, I think, is really only at the top end where the profits exist. And if that were to be invested, I don't think that anyway creates that many jobs, because that's not very job friendly investment. The investments that create jobs come again from the lower end, and that
Right.
is going to happen when demand picks up enough. Now, I don't know how breaking out of this vicious cycle is not, obviously not very easy, because you need jobs to create demand, and you need demand to create jobs. It's a familiar problem in macro, but I think the government has been expecting that the public, signaling at least, and the substantive increase should help. Now, one last thing I'll say on this is, I don't have any evidence for this, but if we were to just look at the where the capital expenditure goes and what kinds of projects and which supply side constraints it alleviates for which kind of businesses, my intuitive feeling is that it is alleviating a lot of constraints for larger firms, firms that care about exports or highways, those kinds of things. There's a lot of firms that have very local supply side constraints. These are local roads, local power, water, these kinds of things. So one good thing about the economic survey is that it's talking about the importance of the states and the local level in solving all of these problems, whether it's regulation, whether it's infrastructure. So if they put money where their mouth is, and if the Finance Commission recommendations come through, they follow through, get enough money into the states and the ULBs, then you're talking about creating infrastructure of a very, much more targeted kind towards the MSMEs, not the large shiny infra, but the smaller
I
thing,
understand.
which is very critical but less commented upon. I think that's where maybe you'll see better multiplier effects. Again, based on no evidence, just on
Right.
thinking about it.
I understand. And so now, Mr. Kanabar, basically, Mr. Basole also talked about how first we need to increase incomes. And now, one way that people were increasing their incomes was through the stock market. And some of them were increasing it through derivatives trading, although a lot of them were losing money. But that was one area that they saw as a way to increase their incomes. But now the government has increased taxes on short-term capital gains, long-term capital gains, and the securities transaction tax on futures and options. The survey, the RBI, the SEBI, even the finance minister, they've expressed concerns about the overvaluation of the market and about the huge retail participation in derivatives. So, do you feel that this is exactly in that direction, that they're trying to kind of put some like dampen this over enthusiasm, basically?
So, I mean, and one can see it with different lens. One lens is what you're trying to articulate, but the other lens to look at it is that today the capital gains tax regime is so complex, so complicated
Right.
that people just get confused, and maybe people maybe also filing wrong taxes or whatever. Right? There
Mhm.
is long term after 1 year. There is long term after 2 years. There is long term after 3 years. On long term, there the tax rate can be 10%. On long term, their tax rate can be 20%. So host of whatever khichdi that could have been created has been created. So the reform or rationalization of capital gains tax regime was sort of on the plate. It was on the radar. It should have come long back. Maybe this was the time when they have introduced. Incidentally, it coincides with the remarks reflected either in economic survey or by SEBI or RBI, whoever. But this was sort of, we have seen it was coming, so it has come. So what they
Right.
have attempted to do is that while they are doing rationalization, obviously there will be plus, there will be minus. And just for everybody's benefit, I'll articulate that there is actually something positive in this, which I'll articulate, but hold on
Okay.
to it. So what they have done, first of all, to understand, essentially, they have said now long term for listed is 1 year, more than 1 year.
Hmm.
For unlisted, long term is more than 2 years, right? So
Right.
very simple, no confusion, straightforward. So if you have real estate, which is definitely unlisted, 2 years. If you have unlisted shares, 2 years. If you have listed shares, 1 year. If you have listed ETFs, 1 year. If you have unlisted ETFs, 2 years. So listed or not listed, that is how you have to look at it. Very simple. Having said that, then they have said that okay, because we are now rationalizing the period, so something which is 1 year becomes 2 year, or 2 year becomes 1 year, whatever, we are also now tweaking the rates. So they have enhanced the long term capital gains on listed from 10 to 12 and a half. For unlisted, long term capital gains has been sort of levied at, again, if it is more than 1 year, and if it is, sorry, so if unlisted shares, if it is kind of long term, it will be again taxed at a higher rate. If it is short term, it will be taxed as a slab rate. Now, what they have attempted to do in this process is they have removed the indexation part, right? So what is indexation? Indexation is that if you have got any asset, whether it is property, gold, or shares, or whatever, if you
Mhm.
are being holding it for a longer duration, you adjust for the inflation factor, right?
Absolutely.
And thereby you increase your cost. Now, because they have rationalized the long term capital gains tax and the period, they have said that we are now removing the indexation part. So now,
Right.
indexation part being removed, if say you are selling immovable property, which is long term, which is what you are holding for more than 2 years, so that
Yes.
gets taxed at 12.5%, right?
Right.
And indexation has gone. Now,
Yes.
in everybody's mind, this was seen as a negative. But our back of the envelope working shows that actually this is positive. What is happening is that by reducing long term capital gains tax on transfer of, say, immovable property from 20 to 12 and a half, means that if you are owning a property, say after 2003, so you have bought a property, house, or whatever immovable property after 2003, and if you are selling it today, you will pay less tax at 12.5% without indexation as compared to the 20% tax that you would have paid with indexation. So actually, there is a benefit which is being given. Of course, if you had a property which is prior to 2003, which was owned and you have got it in legacy, then obviously that will get taxed. At a you will pay higher tax. I mean to
You
say,
will pay higher
because
tax. Yeah.
you're not getting indexation. But anything after 2003, that is the benefit which is being passed on. So it is plus and minus, and as we saw that, 38,000, 37 odd thousand crores of revenue is foregone, right? So we don't know how much of this is foregone for what reasons, and there is 30,000 odd crore of revenue which is being sort of recouped as well. Where it is being recouped, we again need to figure it out. FM did made some clarifications on this as well, but otherwise, while one may say that this is being done to sort of curtail the other income or alternate income, but obviously it is a rationalization, simplification, and in process, actually, the benefit is being passed on.
All right, wonderful. And now I have one final question, which I will ask all three of you because I think it affects all of your areas of expertise. Now, the government, with the economic survey, had a largest section on reforms to India's statistical system. And this also had a passing mention in the budget, but neither of them mentioned the census even once. Now, I know that from a macro point of view, macroeconomic point of view, the census is important. From an employment point of view, the census is important. Even from a taxation point of view, the census is important. You need to know how many people are earning how much, and all of the data that comes with the census, it informs so much. So could I hear from each one of you? I'll start with Ms. Nair about this. That should they absolutely get moving on the census now? Is it just too long overdue?
I think short answer is yes, and also get moving on all the other really old data sources that we have that need updation, IIP, CPI, WPI, all of that. I mean, GDP base is so old. There's stuff in there which we don't use at all anymore. So overall, from a policy and a practitioner point of view, this is really the need of the hour.
Absolutely. And Mr. Kanabar?
If I were to put it a bit differently, today government from a revenue tax perspective as well as income perspective has line by line data, right? So to determine who is earning how much, where actually they are actually telling you in terms of AIS that where you are earning dividend income, where you are earning rental income, where you are earning capital gains, entire data is being provided to you purely from an income generation and tax perspective.
But these are
Also,
only
if
the
you look at
people who are filing returns, right?
yes, definitely. Even from corporate perspective, if you see the GST data is line by line, transactional data. Every sale, every purchase is captured line by the government. So they know actually what is your GST turnover, what is your income tax turnover, what is your accounting turnover. Everything is known, right? So at least for revenue purpose, for determination of income, lot of data is available, and that is where you saw the reference to, you know, digitizing everything, which has paid off eventually. The effort started whatever 5 years back, and it is now paying off. Now government is actually able to come and tell you that you have not reported this income, but see here, this mutual fund or this bank has declared so much of dividend income or capital gains or interest income on your deposits, so please declare and pay it off. So yes, but having said that, the survey definitely plays an important role from a policy perspective.
The census.
Government, the census, right? Because FM did mention that within 6 months there is a committee which will come up with a report to say that what policy changes are required in the income tax act, right? They want to reform it. Now if I don't have census, if I don't have the data, how am I going to come up with an answer, or even to fathom that what changes I need to do in tax laws? So from a tax law drafting, simplification, all that perspective, census data is important.
Okay. And Mr. Basole.
Yeah, I mean, hard to disagree with the need for the census. Just to add to some of the things that it's needed for, of course, all the sample surveys draw on the census frame, which is very old right now. So the sample surveys are also suffering because of that. And the numbers we have on the welfare schemes and so on are mostly administrative data. So a census will also tell us what the actual reach of a lot of these things, whether it's Swachh Bharat, whether it's Ujjwal, many things that have been going on, and it will allow us to update the BPL and the ration system as well, which is again very old.
Absolutely. I was going to come to
So,
that. Yes.
yeah. So all of that will require the census. Now, I mean, obviously, I don't think it's lost on anyone, including the government, that it needs to be done. So I can only assume that it is not being done for some very good reasons, which may include political reasons. So it'll happen when I think they want it to happen.
I see. So, well, that's pretty much it. Thank you all so much for your time. I've covered everything that I wanted to ask you all. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.